won't be so gross. All right, I think we mentioned inhibitors just a little bit last class. That word inhibit should clue you into what we're talking about. Inhibit just means to what? Stop. Stop, prevent. Inhibitors are things that stop enzymes from working or prevent them from working. And we're going to talk about two different kinds. We're going to talk about competitive and non-competitive inhibitors. Well, let's start off by talking about competitive inhibitors. They're called competitive because they compete with what? For what? Substrate. They're shaped like the substrate. And that means they can bind to the active site. So a competitive inhibitor is something that's shaped a lot like a substrate. It'll fit into that active site and block it so that what can't get there? The substrate. And if the substrate can't get there, what does that mean about the reaction? It doesn't happen. So let me say that again. Competitive inhibitors are substances that are shaped a lot like a substrate. They'll fit into the active site and block it. And there are a lot of them out there. Let's talk about one example that you may have actually used in your body before. There are these medications out there called sulfa drugs. Sometimes people that are allergic to antibiotics will give these to when they get a bacterial infection. I hadn't told you what it blocks yet, but here's what these things do. Folic acid is a chemical that we need. It's also a chemical that bacteria need. What is folic acid? If you watch enough TV, you know this because it's on commercials all the time. You got to watch more TV. You got to quit DVR and things. You got to watch the commercials. Okay? Folic acid is a vitamin. It's a vitamin. It's a coenzyme. Certain enzymes in your body have to have it. Particularly, what are they commercial folic acid about? It's all commercials. Orange juice commercials usually is where they talk about it. Orange juice has a lot of folic acid, and they talk about how it's really important for who to get it. Older people. Pregnant women. Okay? And it turns out that apparently folic acid is a coenzyme involved in making the nervous system and the enzymes that make the nervous system. And if you don't get enough folic acid as a mother, as a pregnant woman, your baby might be born with a condition called anencephaly. Now let's break that word into pieces for a minute. What's an mean? No or not. And this root you probably should recognize. What does that mean? C-E-P-H-A-L. Nope. Try again. Head. That word actually means without a head. Now, these babies aren't born without a head. But they're born, really just as bad, they're born without a cerebrum.
What? That's fine.
Now, the cerebrum is the major part of the brain. When you see a picture of the brain, the big part, that's the cerebrum. That's the part where all conscious thought happens. It's where all memories are stored. It's where all reasoning, it's where all emotion is at. It's the part of the brain that makes you human. These babies are born, they're alive. They're breathing.
I didn't know how to breathe.
Because that part is controlled by a different part of your brain. You have a part of your brain called the primitive brain or brainstem. That makes you breathe, it makes you your heart beat. But these babies will never be conscious because this is the part of the brain that causes you to be conscious. So they're born, they live sometimes for months, but they can never wake up. They can never be human. They can never feel anything. They're just like vegetables.
Yeah. So would they seek out like food and stuff?
Would they seek out food? No. They have no, they're not going to move consciously because they don't have any consciousness.
But they can get other stuff.
They're going to put nutrition into their body, into the blood. That's maybe the worst birth defect you could be born with. Yeah, I mean, sometimes they don't. But there's this line between abortion and non-abortion. And this is kind of where, what do you do? I mean, I'm as against abortion as any person on earth is against abortion. But in this case, what do you do? These people can't ever wake up. They don't have the part of the brain that makes them wake up. It's just not going to happen. So I don't know what you do here.
So is there no way to see this before the baby's born?
They probably could, but it's something that they probably wouldn't be looking for. But in an ultrasound, I would imagine they could probably tell. Don't quote me on that, but it's not something they would normally be looking for. What were you saying? Oh yeah, just look up anencephaly and you'll be able to find the answer. Not now, because I'm in the middle of this recording thing with the PowerPoint.
That'd be cool though.
It would be cool, but it's going to mess up my whole setup if I do that though.
You can't like record and go on YouTube. Alright,
Yeah, not right now, no. Yeah.
So they have a head.
Yeah, they have a head, just the main part of the brain's not in there.
So how is their head shaped? Is it like
No, I know. I haven't seen a picture of this in a long time. I think the head is shaped normally. It's open, hollow. All right, but back to where I was going. This folic acid thing. Bacteria need it. You need it. We usually get our folic acid from eating. It's a nutrient. It's a vitamin. Bacteria, on the other hand, have enzymes that make it. They make their own. They don't get it from their diet. They make it. Sulfa drugs block the enzymes that make folic acid in bacteria. Well, if bacteria can't make it, they have to have it. So what happens? If they can't make this vitamin, they die. They have to have it to live. These drugs don't hurt us though, because guess what? We don't have the enzymes to make it, because how do we get it? From our diet. So these drugs inhibit enzymes that bacteria have that we don't. Therefore, it hurts the bacteria. Doesn't bother us. We don't have those enzymes. Does that make sense? It's a competitive inhibitor, though. These actually bind to the active sites of the enzymes in bacteria that make folic acid. Right? And again, the answer to this question, why doesn't this affect us? We don't have those enzymes. We don't make folic acid. We get it from our diet. Let's also talk about non-competitive inhibitors for a minute. They're not competitive, which means they don't bind where?
like the active site?
They don't bind to the active site. They bind somewhere else. But the net effect is the same, which means what? When they bind to that enzyme, what happens? Nothing. They turn it off. They block it from working. They just don't stick to the substrate. They stick somewhere else. Maybe the most famous non-competitive inhibitor is penicillin. We know that penicillin is an antibiotic. We know it stops bacteria from reproducing. But what you may not know, does anybody know what kind of enzymes in bacteria it inhibits? Most antibiotics actually do this. Most antibiotics inhibit enzymes related to making cell walls. Hey, we got them already. So those enzymes to make cell walls don't work, which means bacteria can't what? They can't reproduce. How long does an individual bacteria cell live? A few hours, maybe days. So very quickly what happens to the bacteria? They die out. Why doesn't this bother us? Why does taking penicillin not make you sick? You don't have cell walls. Therefore, you don't have enzymes to make them, right? So we're inhibiting enzymes that bacteria have that we don't. And therefore, we in essence, kill them off. Most antibiotics affect the bacteria's ability to make cell walls by inhibiting the enzymes that make the walls. All right, a lot of poisons are also enzyme inhibitors. Heavy metals. And we're not talking about Van Halen here, right? What are we talking about here with heavy metals? We're talking about lead. We're talking about mercury. We're talking about cadmium. Those are the three main ones. Lead, mercury, and cadmium. So that's Pb and Hg. What's cadmium? CD. Those things are toxic, very toxic. And they're toxic because that once they get into your body, they bind to enzymes in your body. All over your body, but the famous ones are the ones in your brain, right? And they inhibit enzymes in all parts of your body, but specifically in your brain from working. And ultimately, if you get enough of them, they cause death. Arsenic also inhibits enzymes. Cyanide inhibits enzymes. The little toxin from those tree frogs, what do we call them? What's the name for those bright colored tree frogs? Say again? Dart frogs. Poison dart frogs. Poison from those things are enzyme inhibitors. Even like chemical weapons, they work by inhibiting certain enzymes in your body and ultimately lead to death. One other thing to know about these non-competitive inhibitors. They don't bind to the active site, but they may bind to some other place. Like sometimes they'll bind to the spot where the cofactor or the coenzyme is supposed to be. Or they may bind somewhere else. But the key thing about non-competitive inhibitors, they don't bind to the active site, but the net effect is the same. When they're there, the enzyme doesn't work. It's inhibited. All right, last thing we'll mention today is this thing called a metabolic pathway. Big, important word, metabolic pathway. Most things in your body take a lot of steps. Like cell respiration is not a one-step thing. Making of a muscle is not a one-step thing. It takes a lot of steps. Let me go to a picture here for a second. This is a metabolic pathway right here, this picture. We've got our first reactant. What do you think E1 means? The first enzyme. That first enzyme will grab onto that first reactant and notice it's turning substrate A into something else, B. And then enzyme 2 will take B and work on it, turn it into C. 3 will take C, turn it into D, and so on until we get, at the end, what we're actually trying to make. This is the metabolic pathway. All the steps involved in doing something in your body. And typically, each step takes a different enzyme. And notice here we've got at least 5 enzymes involved in this metabolic pathway. Another important term to know related to these pathways is a term called an intermediate. An intermediate is the product you get from each step except which step? Except the last one. What's intermediate mean? Inter means between the beginning and what? The end. It's products you get somewhere between the beginning and the end. It's not what you're actually trying to make, but it's a step in the process of getting there. So like B here, that would be an intermediate. C would be an intermediate. D would be an intermediate. E would be an intermediate. But F rather is what? It's the end product. It's the thing you're trying to make. Which in cell respiration, the end product would be what? ATP. Exactly. Let me back up a slide. Yeah, question.
Why are they both binding to the same enzyme?
Both binding to the same enzyme. Okay, this is another thing. Give me a minute and I'll get to that. Turns out that the product here is actually binding to that first enzyme and turning it off. It's like an on-off switch. This is not an active side over here. This is called a feedback side. And give me a minute and I'll get to that.